The South African government broke the case against Israel on December 29th, accusing it of genocidal acts in its assault on Gaza. They have evidence for these crimes. In Ecuador, the number of penitentiary service officials kidnapped by persons deprived of liberty has risen to 178. In the United States, the White House National Security Council suspended on Thursday the supply of arms and military equipment to Ukraine. Hello and welcome to From the South. I'm Alejandra Garcia from teleSUR Studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. The South African government broke the case against Israel on December 29th, accusing it of genocidal acts in its assaults on Gaza. They have evidence of these crimes. Let's remember that since the conflict began, more than 23,000 Palestinians have been killed. 70% of them are children and women. There is a cruel and inhuman treatment inflicted on a large number of civilians, including minors, who were detained, blindfolded, forced to undress and left outside in the cold before being transferred to unknown locations. Moreover, there have been violations of security assurances with the bombing of areas that had been declared safe for residents. There is also the deprivation of access to food and water, as well as the privatization of access to adequate housing, clothing and hygiene. In addition, Palestinians' lives were destroyed along with their homes, universities and culture, and even with this evidence, the government of Israel is trying to defend itself from these crimes. In the Netherlands, a historic trial for international justice has begun. South Africa accused Israel on Thursday before the United Nations' highest jurisdiction of breaching the Convention for the Prevention of Genocide. The South African Minister of Justice, Ronald Lamola, pointed out in The Hague that no armed attack on the territory of a state, no matter how serious, justifies violating the convention. The representative of the Pretoria legal team stressed that such Israeli statements confirmed the unusual nature of the case and the specific intent of the entity to carry out these crimes. Lamola stressed that since 2004, the actions of the Israeli occupation have limited access to humanitarian supplies, making life in Gaza impossible, and its practice are identical to crime of genocide. Crispin Piri, spokesman for the Ministry of Justice of South Africa, explains that the aim is to put an immediate end to the conflict between Israel and Hamas in order to seek peace on both sides.
The interim measures that South Africa has demanded here in the main are about 9 very detailed interim measures which seek to ensure that the conflict that we are seeing unfolding, particularly the genocide that is being meted out by Israel, is halted with immediate effect, so that we can ensure that we see peace in Gaza and Israel ultimately. And we believe that the interim measures that we're rolling out are significant because they'll have the impact of not only halting the genocide, but ensuring that we get to the table and ensure that we have a peaceful resolution to the conflict that we're seeing. And we believe that it's important that these interim measures are granted by the court to ensure that the international rules-based system of the world is restored, and ultimately that international human rights law means something. It's worth the paper that it's written on.
On Thursday, pro-Palestinian protesters and organizations rallied outside the Western Cape High in solidarity and support of the South African legal team presenting genocide charges against Israel before the International Court of Justice, ICJ. Many legal experts, academics and lawyers joined the picket line dressed in their court robes, while protesters held signs reading "End Genocide, Zionism is Racism, Stop Genocide and Free Palestine." Seha Samhai, an activist lawyer lawyer and director of the Women's Legal Center, said South Africa had submitted its application to secure a ceasefire and would soon submit its main application. In the Cape Town suburb of Bo-Kaap, residents showed their support for the Palestinian people with a series of murals and by waving Palestinian flags in front of their homes. Resident Osman Shabodian said the reason they show solidarity with Palestine is because they come from a past of apartheid. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Cuba reiterated on Thursday its deep concern over the continued escalation of violence by Israel in the illegally occupied Palestinian territories in flagrant violation of the United Nations Charter and international law, including numerous on resolution. The ministry once again strongly condemned the killing of civilians, especially women and children, and United Nations humanitarian workers, as well as the indiscriminate shelling of Palestinian civilians and the destruction of homes, hospitals, and civilian infrastructure. In this context, he expressed support for the request of the Republic of South Africa to initiate proceedings against Israel in the International Court of Justice in connection with that country's violations of its obligations under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. A Palestinian TV reporter detained by the Israeli military in Gaza in December described the experience as the worst 33 days of his life. Dia Al-Kalout told reporters from his own TV network on Thursday that he had been detained with around 100 men, including several relatives who were sheltering in the northern town of Beit Lahija. The journalist said the soldiers accused them of being members of Hamas and forced them to strip to their underwear. Al-Kalout also told the press that among the detainees were boys as young as 16 and a 77-year-old man apparently suffering from dementia. He said they were held at the Sigim military base north of Gaza and were forced to sit on their knees for the first 25 days.
I introduced myself as a journalist during my detention at the Sikkim military base. I expected that they would deal with me in a good way, but I was surprised that things were exactly the opposite. I was surprised that everyone said, journalist, journalist. There were a number of soldiers gathered, and during the investigation I was interrogated on charge of journalism, and they brought a report from Al-Arabi Al-Jadid in the year of 2018 about As-Sajaret Matkal, an Israeli Special Forces unit in operation in east of Khan Yunis. They talked with me about the report with a lot of enthusiasm, abuse and threats.
Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates and more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back. In Ecuador, the number of penitentiary service officials kidnapped by persons deprived of liberty has risen to 178. According to the National Service of Integral Attention to Adults Deprived of Liberty and Juvenile Offenders of Ecuador, there are 158 penitentiary agents and 20 members of the administrative staff kidnapped by inmates in 5 prisons of the country since last Sunday. January 7th, authorities informed that for the moment operations and security protocols are being maintained for the release of the officials. The South American country is going through a sudden increase in violence provoked by criminal groups, about which bomb threats alerts have been registered in south of Quito, while in the city of El Coca, 3 deaths were reported in an arson attack in a nightclub. In Ecuador, at least 1 person died and 5 were injured on Wednesday night as a result of an explosion in a nightclub in the city of Francisco de Orellana. According to local authorities, the blast caused material damages to the club and burned injuries to people who were inside the premises at the moment of the explosion. The Ecuadorian police said the incident could have been a result of a terrorist attack, although it has not yet identified its perpetrators. Investigators have not either determined if the explosion is related to the wave of violence that the country is going through. The armed forces on Wednesday killed 5 terrorists and made 329 arrests in the context of the war declared by the government against groups linked to organized crime. The government of Ecuador presents a new project for the construction of 2 new maximum security prisons in the provinces of Pastaza and Santa Elena. The president of Ecuador, Daniel Noboa, reported that this is a response to the increase in the operations of criminal organizations in the country in response to the events of January 7th, which resulted in the escape from a regional prison of the leader of the Choneros gang, Adolfo Macias, a situation that triggered a wave of widespread violence in prisons and streets of Ecuador, for which President Noboa declared the international conflict. So far, the armed forces report the arrest of 329 alleged terrorists. Colombia's defense minister Iván Velázquez confirmed that the border with Ecuador will remain open and therefore its securities will be reinforced. Referring to the public order events taking place in his neighboring country, the head of national defense left all the help required for Quito. Around 180 soldiers and police are deployed at the formal and informal crossing points. He specified that the troops are already at the international bridge of Rumichaca, the main border crossing between the two countries, and are in permanent coordination with the Ecuadorian authorities. Several Latin American nations have offered the government of the President Daniel Noboa all the cooperation it requires. After a tense day of debate, Argentine officials in the executive branch admitted that there would be changes to the wording of certain articles of the so-called omnibus bill that was sent to the parliament. One of the highlights is the proposal of the Minister of Security, Patricia Bullrich, which has been withdrawn. It is the article referring to the prohibition of gatherings of more than 3 people. During her speech, the head of security for the president's government, Javier Milei, also made a slip on the tongue, referring to a law authorizing extraordinary executions known as the trigger-happy law. Far from admitting a mistake, he reinforced theories which, for some of the deputies present, are seriously repressive. The United States Department of State is threatening the government of Guatemalan President Alejandro Yamatei with a harsh response unless a peaceful transition of power takes place. In the last few hours, the outgoing administration has tried new ways to interrupt the transfer of power. They claim that the Attorney General's office and other state organizations, which they accuse of being taken over by the current government, have announced proceedings that led them to suspect new attempts at sabotage. The President Alejandro Yamatei denounced before the Organization of American States the interference of foreign countries. On the same day, in an interview to a national media, the President-elect reaffirmed that the transition is still at risk. The White House National Security Council suspended on Thursday the supply of arms and military equipment to Ukraine due to lack of budget. The Council's spokesman, John Kirby, confirmed that the last funded military package had already been sent to Ukraine. However, the high U.S. official also noted that it was important that Congress continue to approve the allocation of money to Kyiv. Ukraine's financial assistance from the United States has decreased dramatically since the failure of its summer counter-offensive. However, a package of over $60 billion in funding for the Eastern European country remained at a standstill due to political divisions in Congress, while another of over 50 billion euros remains unapproved in the European Union. In this context, the U.S. Department of Defense reported failures in the control of arms and military equipment destined for Ukraine. The Pentagon issued a report in which it states that the armament sent to the European country has not been adequately traced by the North American officials, generating risks of theft or contraband. In addition, the agency's Inspector General estimated the potential loss at around $1 billion of the total $1,690 million in arms that had been delivered. In this regard, the Biden administration gave Ukraine more authority to report on how it is securing weapons with the delivery of 10 scanners to the Kyiv forces. Pentagon and the State Department officials maintain that it is nearly impossible to account for every one of the thousands of weapons that have been shipped to Ukraine. We have a second short break coming up, but before we invite you to join our WhatsApp community for our English-speaking audience, you can scan the QR code on screen to join directly and share the link to reach more people. Constant news, coverage of Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as the rest of the world. To stay connected and informed with teleSUR, final short break, don't go away. Welcome back. Iranian authorities affirmed on Thursday the arrest of 35 people for their involvement in the recent terrorist bombings in the southeastern city of Kerman. The Iranian Ministry of Intelligence reported that its forces are carrying out a process to identify the material and intellectual authors of the two suicide bombings, as well as people related to the terrorists inside and outside the country. So far, 35 people have been detained in numerous provinces, the statement added. Iranian intelligence indicated that several of the criminals involved in the tragedy have been identified abroad and serious efforts are on their way to hunt them down. The Islamic State Daesh claimed responsibility for the January 3rd attack, which took place near the tomb of Iranian Revolutionary Guard commander Qasem Soleimani, killed 4 years ago by the United States in Iraq. Iran's Army Naval Force reported Thursday the seizure of a U.S. oil tanker pursuant to a court order in the Sea of Oman. In a statement, the Navy informed that the seizure of the Suez Rajan oil tanker, now renamed Saint Nicholas, was carried out after the theft of Iranian oil, which was loaded on this same ship by the United States last August, according to the note. The operation was carried out with a court order in the waters of the Sea of Oman. According to media reports, the tanker St. Nicholas, which was sailing under the flag of the Marshall Islands, has 19 crew members on board, 18 Filipinos and 1 Greek. The vessel was loaded with some 145,000 tons of crude oil in the Iraqi port of Basra and was bound for the Turkish city of Aliaga, according to the tanker's management company Empire Navigation, based in Greece. India and the United Arab Emirates set new levels of bilateral trade at the 10th edition of the vibrant Gujarat 2024. The high-level meeting held in the city of Gandhinagar was attended by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the President of the United Arab Emirates, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, as well as more than 200 delegates, including representatives from 34 countries and 16 international organizations. During the session, the parties established 4 memorandums of understanding concerning cooperation in investment projects in the fields of health, renewable energy, and the development of food parks. Following the assessment of the economic flow, the leaders assured that a non-oil trade can be established before 2030. The Houthi strategy is causing billions of dollars in losses to global shipping. In the face of the crisis, the United Nations Security Council demands an end to the operations. The same people who refused to vote in favor of a ceasefire that could have saved more than 20,000 lives in Gaza agreed to demand warranties for marine cargoes. Except for Russia, China, Algeria, and Mozambique, all the other members of the Council approved a resolution demanding a halt to the attacks on the ships in the Red Sea. Mohammed Abdel Salah, spokesman for the Ansarullah movement, responded that they will stop when Israel stops bombing women and children. He also warned Washington that they will respond to forces that try to obstruct the operation. Russia, a storm causes slight suspensions and road closures in the north of the country. Russian local media report poor visibility on the roads. Saleghat airport authorities informed that due to the weather condition, operations were partially suspended. The Crimean department of the Ministry of Emergency Situations of Russia warned that after the passage of the cold front on January 12th, snow, sleet and in some places heavy rains are expected in Crimea. So they urged the population to be attentive and stay alert because with these conditions the risk of emergencies and accidents increases. We have come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net and join us on social media, Facebook, X, Instagram,